Hi, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to today's immigration chat with me, Attorney Lilian Chukura of Lily Legal, where we help our clients get status for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. So, today I will be talking to you about the red flags, okay? The red flags that you need to avoid when you're filing a marriage based case. And I will take you through a few red flags that I have seen in practice, USCIS has really flagged, and things that they are looking at when you go ahead and file a marriage based case. So, the goal of this channel, this page, is and these lives is to make sure that you are informed and you know before you even start your case or while you're in the middle of your case what's going on, what you should be aware of, and make sure that you are getting proper information. If you would like to schedule a time to speak with me, you can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, or by calling my office at 508 443 1788. And as always, all my contact information will be in the description to this video. So, let's jump right in. Okay. So, the first thing that you need to know before you start, okay, before you even start your case, because I've had people call me, and I'll give you an example of a call is, hi, Attorney Lillian. So, we just got married. We're not living together. We don't really know if we want to live together, um, but we want to start the process right away. Do y'all see the red flag there? Or do I need to or do I need to spell it out for you? Okay. There is a huge red flag for USCIS when you file a marriage-based case and you and your spouse do not live together. You don't have any documentation showing you live together. You can't even truthfully testify that you're living together. That's a huge red flag. So, red flag number one, not living with your spouse. Okay. It's a red flag. However, there are exceptions to this red flag. There is a way to overcome this. So, if you have a really, really good reason for why you and your spouse do not live together, then USCIS may forgive this red flag, right? They may overlook this red flag. But just know if you walk in to your interview and based on your applications, it shows that you and your spouse does not live together, that is a major red flag for USCIS. Because the goal of a marriage-based case, right? The first thing USCIS is trying to determine is this marriage real? Right? Is this marriage real? And if they can't figure that out from your paperwork, they need to figure that out from your testimony. And if your testimony at your interview basically confirms that you kind of don't live together, that's a major red flag. It's hard to overcome that unless, of course, you have documentation showing that you live together at the time of the interview. So, if at the time of filing you don't live together, but you had plans to live together, let's say like 3 months down the road, you already started looking for apartments together, you're waiting for a lease to expire, something like that, fine. You can go ahead and file, but just know at the time of your interview, the office is going to have questions because on your application, you're going to have two separate addresses. And you're most likely, there's a question on the form that says, what was the last address that you and your spouse lived together at? And if you've never lived together and your plans are to move in together 3 months after you file or a year after you file, even, then the answer to that will need to be never lived together. And if it says never live together, red flag, red flag, red flag. USCIS is going to be looking at your application with a magnifying glass to see what is this really real? So when you go to your interview, be prepared to answer questions about your living situation, especially if by the time of the interview you're still not living together. Again, major red flag at that point. So definitely Keep that in mind. If you're not living together and you have no plans of living together, please, please, please have a good reason for it. Okay? Have a really good reason for it, because most married couples, right? When you think, when you think of a stereotypical married couple, they live together. And that's what you really need to think about, is a stereotypical married couple, because some officers are looking at it through that lens of what would a stereotypical married couple do. So a stereotypical married couple will be living together. So if you have no plans to live together, you would need to really make sure that you're talking to an immigration lawyer before you start the process, because this is one big red flag that can lead to USCIS denying your case. Now, on the same vein, if you have a good reason for not living together, do not, do not, do not say on your application that you're actually living together when you're not living together. Because if USCIS officer that's interviewing you has any inclination that you two might not be living together and does a home visit, now not only one, you lie to USCIS, right? You lie to US immigration. Two, USCIS may find that your marriage was entered into for just immigration purposes. That is the worst. Okay. That is the worst. It's one thing for them to find that you didn't present enough documentation. It's another thing for them to find that you entered into this marriage for the wrong reasons, for only immigration reasons. And once they find that, it is nearly impossible. I say nearly impossible because there may be other ways for you to get status, but through marriage, for you to get married, to marry someone else and try to get status through them, it is going to be nearly impossible. And then, if you, let's say you end up having a child that's a US citizen that's over 21 and they file for you, USCIS is not going, the marriage fraud is not going to come up as a barrier to you getting your green card. However, the lying, right? That fraud or misrepresentation. So you saying that you live together when you didn't actually live together is going to come back and bite you. So now you need a waiver. And if you've seen my waiver video, you know that for you to get a waiver, you need a US citizen or permanent resident, spouse, or parent. Children do not count for these types of waivers. So, one, you can't get status through another spouse. And two, even if you can get status through a child, a parent, an employer in the future, this will still come up and you'll still need a waiver. So it's really, 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 really important that if one, you have this red flag, you're talking to a lawyer first, and two, do not lie about it. Okay, you don't want to lie that you're living together when you're not living together, because that will just mess up your case even more. Again, if you have a really good reason, we can formulate an argument and be able to show USCIS that it's a good reason. But if you don't plan on living together, you don't have a good reason for living together, it's really going to be hard for you to make those arguments. Okay, so that's the first red flag. Not living with your spouse and then lying about it too is a red flag. So if USCIS does a home visit, just know that is always a possibility in every single case. It is a possibility. Now, the next red flag, this should be obvious, but the next red flag is having children outside of your marriage. Right? You got married in 2016, you had a child in 2017, and that child is not with your spouse. Right? USCIS, of course, again, stereotypical marriages. Your child would be with your spouse, not with someone else, a third party outside of your marriage. So just keep that in mind. Stereotypical marriages is what we're talking about here. USCIS has a hard time with um, non-confirming marriages, understanding that times have changed. People may have different agreements within their marriage, but that doesn't diminish the marriage. However, they're still looking at it through a lens of a stereotypical heterosexual marriage. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. So think of a stereotypical heterosexual marriage, and that's what they're basing their a lot of the policies and questions and all those things are going to be based on that. So just be prepared to respond to the reason why you had a child outside of your marriage. Again, there could be reasons for it. I have had a client that we were able to overcome this, and they were still able to get their green card through their marriage. But but it was a fight, right? It was a fight with USCIS to try to explain how that all came about, how the wife felt about it, how that led to issues in the marriage. And we were able to explain it in a way that the officer was that it made sense to the officer. And we backed it up with documentation. Made sense to the officer. Officer still went ahead and approved the case. So just know, not all um not in all instances this will be like detrimental to your case, but it will be a red flag in your case. So typically you would list your children on your application if you have children. So say like this person's relatives, and you list all of them. And then when your spouse gets to the interview and they're like, "Oh, do you have any children?" And your spouse says, "No, I don't. But my husband does, or my wife does, or all those things." Like the office is going to make a note of it. And they're going to grill your husband, your spouse, grill you on how did this even come about, right? How are you going to convince the officer that your marriage is real if you are having children outside of your marriage, especially if you didn't just have one oops, it was multiple. So just keep that in mind as you're going through your process, that this is a big red flag to the officer. Another red flag to keep in mind is, and some people are going to push back on this, but it is what it is. If you haven't met each other's parents, so you get to the interview, the officer's asking you, "Oh, have you met each other's parents? Have you talked to each other's parents?" And your answer is no. That's a red flag, because it tells the officer that you're not openly telling your own families that you are married, but you are here telling USCIS that you are married. Okay. So if you are not even telling your own family that you're married, how is USCIS supposed to believe that you're actually married? Okay. So it's really important. Again, the things that you do are really important, especially knowing that you're going to be questioned about it at your interview, knowing that it doesn't just go away, right? This is stuff that will come up at your interview. What's your parents' names? What's your spouse's parents' names? Have you ever met their parents? When was the last time you saw their parents? Have you ever spoken to their parents? These are a normal line of questioning during your interview. Very normal. And if the answer is like, "No, never met the parents, we we haven't talked I haven't talked to the parents, they don't even know we're married," the officer's already like, "How do they not even know you're married and you're here?" Right? How long have you been married? And especially if your spouse is saying that they're close to their family, but yet didn't tell their family that they're married to you. That's a whole thing. Okay. That's a whole thing that's going to make the officer question whether your relationship is real. Again, it does not mean that your relationship is not real. It just means it's going to raise questions for the officer, and you have to be prepared for that. Unfortunately, you have to be prepared to answer those questions. So remember, if you and your spouse, you know, have a good reason for it. Maybe your spouse is not talking to his family at the moment, or the family is not supportive of your relationship and they're not part of your life. There has to be a reason for why your spouse is not telling his or her family that you two are married. Okay. And again, the same thing goes for if they have children and the children do not know that you two are married. That's another layer to it. So just keep all of that in mind, that it is going to raise a red flag. It just is. There's no way around it. Okay. So another thing that raises a red flag is if you, let's say, when you go to the interview, when you go to your interview with your spouse that's the US citizen needs to show a form of ID, right? Either a driver's license, passport, something, right? If their driver's license has an address that's not your marital home, again, this also goes to, are they actually living together? But this is just another way for the officer to, for the red flag to come up, right? One way is the form clearly shows that you two don't live together, but now the officer is looking at the ID that you present to show your identity, and it has a completely different address. And right, it's one thing if you got the ID issued a year or two before you and your spouse moved in together, before you two even got married. That's one thing, that's excusable, because you and your spouse were not even living together at the time, right? You two were not even married at the time, so it's completely fine. However, if you got your ID while you're married and living together, again, while you're telling USCIS, right? You are presenting to USCIS that you are married on January 1st, 2021, and you moved in together on January 2nd, 2021. However, your ID from March 2nd, 2021 shows that you live at a different address. Because remember, in most states, in order for you to get a state ID or get a state license, you have to show proof of your address. And sometimes it's a letter that came to you. Like, there's multiple ways to show proof of your residence, but you do have to show the proof. And if you are getting an ID issued while you're married, while you're living together, right? And the ID has a completely different home address for you than the one that you supposedly share with your spouse. Oh, all the red flags are going up now. Like, all the red flags. Anything you tell the officer from then on, the officer is writing it down and just making a note of every other little minute things that would have been like, oh, let's keep going. This is fine. Now, because they see that red flag, everything is up for discussion. Everything that you say is going to be scrutinized. No matter how small it is going to be scrutinized. That's just how it works. You do not want to raise the red flags, because once you do, this is what happens, right? Once you raise the red flags, this is how um, you end up messing up your own case. So the first thing is avoid the red flags, avoid it. You know, go through your application thoroughly, go through your history thoroughly with your lawyer, and make sure that you are discussing these red flags that may come up before you even get in there. So that's why for every single one of my clients, we do a mock interview before your actual interview, because we want to flag anything that could potentially be an issue for the officer. So before we even get to the interview, you should already know what the red flags are in your case. I should already know what the red flags are in your case. So that I can probably properly represent you. Because if we get in there and if I've asked you, do you have any criminal history? And you tell me no, and we get in there and the officer has like 4 pages of, criminal history for you, that's a problem. So if we want to go in knowing all the red flags, having documentation to back up any red flag, and also me preparing you on how to testify to those red flags. Because sometimes, honestly, you get in there, you're frazzled, you're nervous, the officer's asking you all these questions, and if it's the first time you're hearing those questions or hearing your your situation framed that way, you may end up saying things that is not actually accurate just to get out of that situation as quickly as possible. However, with the mock interviews, I ask all those questions. I bring up, when I see a red flag, I push in on the red flag so that it's a red flag before you even get in there, and know that you are prepared. If the officer asks you questions about it, it's not going to be your first time hearing them, and you will be ready to respond to those. So just know, red flags exist. You want to avoid the red flags. um that's just what it is. Oh, a bonus red flag. Just a bonus one before we close out today. A bonus red flag. If you are going to submit documentation to prove your relationship, you should be going through the documentation with a freaking magnifying glass. Okay, you need to especially if you're submitting bank statements to show that you two have a joint bank account. We're going to need to go through those, right? You need to know what the transactions are on it are, because if the officer pulls the um, bank statements and it's like, oh, what's this charge over here? And you don't know what it is, or you have no clue what anything on your bank statement is, that's a red flag. That is a huge red flag. So, or if you like put in the bank statements, but you only use it to pay your rent and nothing else. So you pay your rent, but you don't buy groceries. You don't, you've never stopped for, gas and filled up your tank with the joint account. You've never had any household expenses other than your utilities and your rent go through the account. That's a red flag, because the officer is sitting there looking at this bank statement, looking at the documents they are giving them, and they're looking at it as, okay, this is a typical marriage, right? A stereotypical marriage where these people have a joint bank account. What are the type of transactions that will go through the bank account? It's not what would you do as the person sitting in front of them, but what would a typical stereotypical couple do? If they have a joint bank account, they'll buy their joint things through that account. So what does that mean? You'll buy your groceries, you buy your household supplies. If you need to buy detergent, if you need to go to Target, Walmart, whatever store you buy your groceries at, you're using that joint account to pay for it, to show that you two are commingling your funds. So the officer is going to be looking at that. They do look at your bank statements. They don't just look at the top to see if both names are on it. They also look at the transactions. So it's really important that if you're going to include bank statements, that you make sure it's not going to raise unnecessary red flags. Of course, people have, you know, create joint bank accounts to pay their utilities and mortgage and rent and all those things, and then use their personal accounts, their individual accounts to just buy things as they see fit for the house. Does that happen? Yes, that happens every single day. But if you are producing a joint bank account for the sole purpose of showing USCIS that you two are commingling your finances and you're building this financial life together, just know if you're not actually using the account, it's a red flag. Okay, so that is your bonus red flag for today. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit the like button. If you know someone that needs to hear this, go ahead and share the video with them. And if you are watching in a place that you can subscribe and you don't want to miss any of my future uploads, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And as always, if you want to get in contact with me to see if one, you have a case, and two, how to get started on your case, go ahead and do that. All my contact information is in the description to this video. And of course, my number is always on the screen. And as always, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're watching in the replay, thank you so much for joining me still. And as always, I am Lilian Chukura. I am the owner of Lily Legal, where we do immigration law and we do it really well. Thank you and have a great rest of your week. Bye.